public sector. We have three wonderful speakers with extensive experience in this topic that we'll be dealing with today. Most of you who have joined us here today, thank you, would agree with me that digital transformation is no longer a dream, it's a reality in the public sector, and not only in the public sector, but society as a whole. And as digital transformation increasingly makes its base in the public sector, the same public sector faces increasing challenges and complexity because of many things that our panelists are going to share with us today. One of those things is that because digital transformation in itself is a process, it's not a once-off event, it keeps on transforming, it becomes complex. And as that complexity arises, many challenges emerge. And then when you solve one challenge, the users, on the other hand, also are one step ahead. People with malicious intent also emerge into the space. So basically, public sector officials and their contractors need to always be on their toes, because they will agree with me that as we are speaking right now, actually you can blink, and when you blink and the next moment you open your eyes, you have been attacked for various reasons, or you have various glitches. So we have assembled a team of speakers that we have today. I'm going to introduce them to you. And this week, actually, I learned about one word, techno-feudalism. So I think it's also one reality that lives with us today. And I'm going to mention what the techno-feudalism actually means. What it means, just quickly want to look here. So they say techno-feudalism, in the past we had feudalism, which was a system of land ownership. But with techno-feudalism is that tech giants own platforms such as Google, Amazon, Meta, Apple, etc. And then under feudalism, peasants farmed the land. But under techno-feudalism, users create content and data. And then under feudalism, rent was paid to the landlords. Then under techno-feudalism, fees, commissions, and data is given to the platforms. And then under feudalism, there was limited freedom mobility. But under techno-feudalism, there's limited choice due to platform dominance. So this techno-feudalism digital transformation presents a wide range of challenges that we need to deal with today. Introducing our speakers today, we have Mr. Musa Salmamza. Musa is an information security manager at Entity Data with over 18 years of experience in information security, cloud governance, and enterprise risk management. His work focuses on shaping security architecture and program development, helping organizations across multiple industries to strengthen their cyber resilience, protect critical services, and reduce cyber risk in increasing complex digital environments. And then the second speaker that we have today is Mr. Dr. Mafua Fuane. He's the executive head of security services at Nexio and vice chairperson at IITPSA, SIG Cyber. He is a cybersecurity strategist specializing in integration of cybersecurity into governance, risk, and institutional performance. And then our last speaker is Professor Kerry Lim Thompson from the Nelson Mandela University. He's a professor and director of the School of Information Technology at that university and director for the Center of Research, Information, and Cybersecurity. She's the National Research Foundation C2 rated researcher and current chair of the ITTPSA Special Interest Group on Cybersecurity. So, colleagues, those are the three speakers for today. And without wasting any further time, I would like to call upon Mr. Musa Salmamza to present on understanding the modern threat landscape in government. Mr. Musa, I would like to hand over to you to do your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Bongani, and good morning, and thank you for joining us in this session. The title of my session is From Cyber Risk to Public Trust, and cyber risk is where we begin the journey, whilst public trust is exactly what is at stake. So in reviewing this topic and building the material, I attempted to use system theory to establish the correlation between cyber risk and public trust. And in the course of this presentation, you will see the correlated relationship between these two phenomena. My goal at the end of this session is that you have a framework and that you can take back with you a set of actions. A quick word on the speaker. I wouldn't spend much time. Introductions have already gone out. I am, as mentioned, an information security manager with one of the largest managed security service providers and system integrator, formerly known as Dimension Data. A lot of you would resonate with that name. I also chair the IITPSA's Western Cape chapter, and I sit on the Cybersecurity Special Interest Group Committee. My work sits at the intersection of technical security and governance, and of course, more recently with AI integration. In terms of what we will cover, our agenda items, I've structured this into a 4-part, and each of this builds on the last. So part 1 looks at the shift. You will agree with me that there's been a significant shift. It may not be very visible in all sectors and industries, but there's been a shift in terms of what cyber or what security and IT used to be. So why is it that now we consider IT as a governance issue and not an IT issue? Part 2 focuses on the landscape, and in that we will explore what the 4 main threat pillars, and we try to break them down into plain languages so that we can all understand for both technical and non-technical individuals and stakeholders. Part 3, which is now the target, looks at why government is such a uniquely attractive target for cyber criminals and malicious users. It is such a high, rewarding target, and we'll explore why that is. And then we will conclude with looking at the impact and how the impact of a cyber event and how it is managed translates into either building trust or further damaging the trust of the state. And ultimately, before we conclude this section, our takeaway would be that public trust is a responsibility for all stakeholders at all levels. Before we venture into all of the different segments of this presentation, I would like to first establish the core and central idea, which is trust. And I made effort to ensure that it's not mentioned in passing, but however, it is something we need to retain throughout the course of this engagement. Let's understand what public trust means in this context. Now, public trust is not just one thing. It is, of course, multidimensional. And there are 5 core dimensions of what public trust is. And this is from a citizen's perspective. So as a citizen, from a citizen's standpoint, what does public trust mean in day-to-day living and in everything we do in our effort to nation building? The first is institutional. Now, as a citizen, you have to ask yourself, will the state deliver what it promises? From a procedural point of view, is this procedure fair? Is, when we consider data, is my information safe? A citizen will also be interested and concerned in terms of constitutional. Are my rights or not? Are they protected? Even in the event a system is compromised, what would be the top priority of the state in that event?
Hi, Musa. Sorry, sir. Your presentations is not showing. Have you shared your slides?
Okay, yes.
Thank you.
Just confirm if you can see that.
Yes, we can see it now. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks for that. I actually thought it was going through. So let me just do a quick recap. So I will just start over here. I have highlighted what the breakdown and the structure of this presentation looks like. The shift highlights the movement, what we've observed across industries and sectors, how IT-related concerns are leaving just the IT domain and are no longer being a technical focus efforts, but also across governance. And we've seen in the landscape what are the core concerns for public sector entities and departments. Target here focuses mainly around what is the attractive nature of the public sector to cyber attacks and how it all plays into a political and geopolitics dimension. And in terms of the impact, how does that affect, organizations, government, and ultimately public trust? So I was highlighting the 5 dimensions of trust. And from a citizen's point of view, you are concerned from an institutional viewpoint. Will the state always deliver what it promises? When you consider procedure, you certainly are concerned. Is this process, this procedure that is laid down, is it fair? Does it hold itself accountable if I have to provide my information and expect a particular service to be delivered? When thinking of data, you have to concern yourself with the security of your data when you give your data your biometrics, when you are required to provide your biometrics in order to access certain level of services. As a citizen, you also you have the right for your rights and privileges to be protected, even when a system collapses or fails. You expect that systems will still take your rights and privacy as a priority. In terms of inter-institutional collaborations, do the departments and the various government entities trust each other? And what is the relationship like? Because all of these different elements do affect a facet of public trust. And so in the next few slides, we'll tie them together and try and establish a connection between them. A simple consideration for the audience is, if a grandmother wants to access her grant and the system is unavailable at that primary time, what particular concern would this grandmother be having? She's not concerned with the technology involved in delivering the grant. She considers her trust in the system that the state has promised to provide as compromised and as without any form of guarantees. And that is exactly what this point is stressing, that public trust hinges and leverages on delivering services as promised to citizens. So let's look at the shift in particular. cybersecurity is no longer an IT issue, and it is moved towards governance and more management level. It's no longer left to the IT professionals, left to the technical individuals. And we will see how that transformation has occurred in the next few slides. So let me show you why cybersecurity is no longer an IT issue, but a governance-related matter. Historically, we have seen in many organizations and businesses that the CIO owns and has responsibility across all these different sectors to ensure that the systems are up and running. However, in today's business and modern work environment, it has changed. And for some sectors are faster than others. But we see a change and a shift in that particular constitution. Here we see organizations are becoming more concerned with impact and implication of gaps and missing security controls and missing security investment, because organizations are beginning to understand the implications and what that could translate into. Now, if we consider, when doing my research, what I found, which the data supports, is that many organizations in time past have actually funded IT-related investment as an overhead. Now, that's a concerning point. It has not been part and parcel of the budget cycle and a deliberate intention to invest into infrastructure and security processes to safeguard the platform and technology used by the organizations to deliver services as mandated to. But today, there's been a major change from that. It's been an intentional effort to invest and to train and to obtain the skills required in those environments to support the safe and operating principles for systems. Let's take an example from the Department of Justice case. This is a very unique case, and it does buttress the point. So in September 2021, there was a ransomware attack at the Department of Justice that paralyzed a lot of their services. Now, investigation showed that there's been three main components that were missing, and this was an antivirus system, an intrusion detection system, as well as a monitoring solution that was completely switched off, and the reason being that the licenses have expired. Now, and this was obviously a failing of the system, of a governance layer. They should have ensured that these systems were up and running. Now, we saw the first Copy Act fine that was leveled in South Africa against this organization. This was to the tune of 5 million rand. And the reason wasn't because the breach occurred, but because they failed to uphold basic governance responsibility and ensuring that systems that are supposed to keep your organization running were not up to speed. And that was the first issued Copy Act fine that we saw in South Africa. Now, that is a significant moment in time and a lot of lessons learned. So we see that there is a significant responsibility that moves away from just IT and technical related issues to a governance related matter. So in this instance, budget has to be provided and planned for and ensure that systems are operational at every given point in time. Looking at the landscape, there are four main threats against the public sector, and this affects all sectors, but considering the public sector in particular. Before we go into those, individual threat factors, I would like us to first look at what the drivers are, some of the main components that accelerates the threats that are faced by public sector entities and departments. So on this slide, what I really want us to take away is to understand that technology adoption has changed significantly, and this has never been in history. And the data points, for example, what we measure between first to 100 million users. Now, in the case of mobile phone, it took approximately 16 years for mobile users to arrive at 100 million users globally. There's a significant correlation between the time it takes when technology is released and adopted to the point in which you begin to tackle the major security-related issues that comes from that. Now, mobile phones, 16 years time interval. It took 7 years for the internet to get to 100 million users. It took Instagram 2.5 years to arrive. It took TikTok 9 months to get to 100 million users. However, with AI, there is approximately 2 to 3 months time period in which 100 users were recorded. And if you recall, ChatGPT was released sometime in November 2022. And from that time onwards, it's been multiple AI solutions, intelligence systems infused across. It's important to keep that in mind. So technology adoption plays a significant role. Attackers are using this same technology and accelerating the rate at which they attack, as well as the complexity of these attacks. So it's important to keep that in mind. The next is the data. Now, every one of us on this call is contributing to the proliferation of data as it continues to grow. And the estimation by IDC was that by 2025, we would have had 175 zettabytes of data across the internet and all systems. That's a significant size of data. What does that mean? It simply opens up the attack surface because you consider the data coming across all of these different systems. It is becoming more porous. And so organizations in the public sector have to be concerned with the proliferation of data that is expanding and growing across multiple data sources. Now let's go back to the main threat sector environment. And this main 4 threat pillars actually have driven a lot of the threat activities across, looking at South Africa. Let's look at Transnet, for instance. In 2021, July specifically, the Durban port was attacked, and that resulted in a reduction of about 10% in its capacity. Now, if we consider Transnet, handles about 60% of the entire South African container traffic. Now, that's a significant operation in itself. But this organization was attacked and its capacity reduced significantly. As a matter of fact, the Mineral Council estimated that about 50 billion rand was lost as a result of that attack. Think about the ripple effect across the sector and what that means for business, for organizations who have urgent need for items and consumables. Then we look at data breach. Experian also suffered significant losses as a result of data exposure. About 24 million South Africans had their data exposed when this happened in 2020. There was basically no protection across, and this client had suffered a massive data exfiltration, and citizens had their data exposed. The next one is SolarWinds, and this comes under the category of supply chain. Today, we have a complex supply chain system across Africa, across the world, because of interconnected systems and interdependencies. Here we saw a significant disruption in operations, and this is even pre-COVID, where attackers, state-sponsored attackers, actually attacked SolarWinds that supplies 18,000 organizations. And this is a major supply chain system. The most common insider threat example that we can find is the South African Defense Force that also had a data breach in 2023. And we will go into more detail further down in this presentation. But we see a lot of this threat pillars as one of the top 4 that impacts public sector entities and government because of the huge implications and impact this could translate into. Now let's unpack what the targets is. And this is part 3. Why is government so attractive to attackers? It's very easy to draw a conclusion from that because the public sector really has some of the critical infrastructure. For example, SARS holds all of our tax profile, and attackers know that. They have our biometrics, and therefore that is a significant crown jewel for attackers to go after. They also have very large attack surfaces. In most cases and instances, because I work for one of the largest managed service providers, when we engage with public sector entities and organizations, there's a particular pattern to what you see, immediately. And some of them is because of the systems that are used there. They're quite legacy, they are older systems, they are very distributed. In some cases, there's no clear inventory in terms of where are all the systems, where are all the platforms, where is the ownership of this? You don't see that a lot in private entities. Yes. And so these are some of the reasons why public entities and government departments are really attractive, to attackers. The complex environment is quite broad. And there is also another factor. Attackers know that there is a budget constraint. There's a real budget constraint in investing into IT systems and security systems to protect their platforms and operating environments. For example, again, in the South African Defense Forces, there's a budget that was assigned to investing or protecting their cyber command centers. And this was a very small fraction, about 0.49% of the entire defense budget was dedicated to just protecting and keeping the systems ongoing because other areas are of more priority. So attackers understand this. There's also a political angle to it, like we've seen with the geopolitical unrest and attacks that are ongoing. That cyber attack and warfare has become a major or mainstream warfare strategy. Moving on to the impact, we need to move very quickly. We want to understand what all of this translates into for a citizen. How does this affect their day-to-day and their belief and hope in a state that has negotiated all of those terms? So we want to translate the technical risk into what governance impact looks like. We considered 4 pillars as well. Service delivery, that is critical. And we all can attest to what service delivery looks like in different areas and what we hope for service delivery to look like. Whether you're concerned with, child maintenance benefits for bereaved families, whatever your concerns are, you expect that the system which was designed and developed and, deployed would meet your specific requirement. Then we see financial integrity, which is very key. And you would agree with me that when we consider warfare, one of the ways that nation-state attackers would attempt to, subvert and change or bring a government down would be through the financial systems, to undermine the systems where payment transactions do occur. So financial integrity is such a critical element in any given society, in any given operating administration. Then constitutional rights, privacy, dignity, access to systems, social security functions that citizens should benefit and leverage of are very critical because they are determinant of public trust when cyber events are considered. Then, of course, public confidence. How do you ensure you uphold that above all else? Let's look at what really builds and what destroys public trust from a cyber perspective. Now, we use 2 cases to analyze this, and it's important because we want to show that not only is the event itself having that effect on citizens and public trust, but also how the management of that event and the response really ends up either building or destroying public trust. We know that cyber event will happen at some point. So it's not a matter of if, it's really a matter of when. But when that happens, how prepared are you? What is your response mechanism that you've put in place? And looking at these 2 instances helps us understand really how public trust can be upheld and developed, even when cyber events occur. The National Health Laboratory Services had a major attack, a ransomware attack in 2024, in which backups were deleted and about 6.3 million test results were delayed from processing and analysis, and this happened during the Mpox outbreak. Now, how did the organization respond to that? The CEO openly went public to accept the implication and to say that this really endangers the safety and the well-being of millions of patients, and they engage openly with the regulators. And not only that, but they also committed 300 million rand to remediation, to upskilling, to putting the right systems in place. So that significantly restores the public trust in this entity and in this organization in the way that they responded to an event that, in other words, could have been prevented, but it did happen. On the other end of the spectrum, we look at South African Defence Forces. By the way, this is public information, so it's available publicly. When the incident occurred in 2023, in August, the first response was to, and this really happened where about 1.6 terabytes of data was leaked. But the first response was to deny and to say this was clearly a case of fake news. And, that would drag on for some time. And certainly that creates an environment of mistrust and, and a lack of confidence, and continuously continued in that. And even the regulators were not engaged immediately. And so this shows the contrast in the way that cyber events are handled by entities in the public domain that should uphold public trust above all else. And in terms of key takeaways, as I conclude this, I would like everyone on this call to consider and understand that cybersecurity is a governance duty. It's not left to IT, it's not left to technical. It is a governance issue, and therefore requires all stakeholders at all levels to come together and take up that as a core responsibility. And of course, understanding the threat landscape helps you understand what you're up against, what is your risk profile in effort to conduct your business. How are you managing that? It's important to be able to measure that. And lastly, of course, measuring the impact and not simply activities, but actually testing what your systems are and what they would look like in the event such a pressure or stress is applied to your environment, like an attack on your critical efforts. And so with this, I conclude my presentation. Thank you so much for your attention, and we will take questions afterwards.
Thank you very much, Musa, for that. That was very insightful. I mean, most of us took or thought of this cybersecurity as purely a technical issue, an IT issue. But I think one of the issues, I'm not going to go into detail, I think we'll deal with this in the Q&A. But one thing that's very critical is that cybersecurity is a governance issue. You must have a governance protocol in place. And then also you mentioned the four major threats, data breaches and their consequences, for example, on privacy, the violation of constitutional obligations, rights of individuals, SCM, supply chain, insider threats, including ransomware, as some of the four major cybersecurity challenges that face governments. And overall, the simple message here is that it impacts on service delivery very badly. So I'm going to go to the call upon the next speaker, who's Mr. Dr. Mafuafuane, who's going to speak about governance, about embedding cybersecurity into public sector governance, risk, and professional practice in the public sector. Over to you.
Good morning, colleagues and leadership. Thank you, Bongani. Thank you, Musa, for such a great insight. Like as already explained by Bongani, I'll be taking you through how can we best embed cybersecurity into public sector in terms of governance, risk, and professional practices, which is one of my favorite topics when we look at risk and compliance, GRC, for those who know. And then I like what Musa indicated, that we previously, or in most cases, we do look at cybersecurity as a form of ICT. But in terms of responsibility and accountability, it's honestly not fully relies on IT. And we're going to go through those to just elaborate more in terms of how can different stakeholders play part, ensuring that we understand our risk and also that we do play our part in terms of governance. As already introduced by Bongani, my name is Dr. Mafuafuane. So as introduced by Bongani, my name is Dr. Mafuafuane. I work at Nexio as the executive head for cybersecurity. I'm also a vice chair for CIG Cyber, which is a special interest group in ITTPSA. And then through my focus, I focus on cybersecurity governance and strategy, security operation and incident response, cybersecurity risk and compliance, also the managed SOC and SIM through my company Nexio, and also doing some public sector cybersecurity transformation, and then also playing part in thought leadership as per today. So let's look in more details in terms of how can we embed the cybersecurity into our day-to-day. If you look at the key message today is that cybersecurity is now a governance issue. Musa already elaborated a lot around that. Cybersecurity is a service delivery issue because without a proper cybersecurity, we then foresee issues within the service delivery. It also plays a huge part when it comes to public trust and also on our day-to-day professional ethics. Why does this matter to us? We can give a scenario or look at a scenario whereby a ransomware attack or a cyber attack hits a certain department. Like was indicated, there will definitely going to be a citizen loss in terms of service access. They won't be able to access the services. In certain situations, you might find that the government is not able to pay employees or even pay the supply chain. And then on the other hand, we also understand that the national stability can also be affected because it all ties in, especially when you look at the trading side of things. A good example was Transnet in this instance. And then if we were to look around SA context, is that we have seen a lot of ransomware attack in the past. And should a ransomware attack may perhaps hit our municipality, that will definitely affect our water billing. In some instances, maybe our electricity billing as well, which definitely that will upset the citizen. We can imagine if Home Affairs got hit, ID passport delays. So is the SASSA with a grant that most of millions of our citizens rely on. So this directly affects our accountability, public confidence, and also in some instances, human dignity where the data is stolen or the data is publicized. So if we were to look in terms of the public sector threat reality that we're currently facing, I'm not going to go into more details since Musa already touched base on this, but some of the primary threat that we see through my organization, through the customers that we work with and government institutions, ransomware has been one of the key, whereby the system been locked, people not being able to access their laptops or services. In that instance, services which needs to be served to the public is delayed by days, in some instances by weeks. And also when we look at the cost to recover, that is very quite high. Even the ransomware amount sometimes is quite less compared to the cost itself. In some instances, it's around phishing attacks that we do see. And then in this one, it's a situation whereby attackers do complete something that we call social engineering, and they do try to manipulate employees, either by targeting their email address, whereby they can click and then try to harvest their credentials, which is just the door opener to the likes of ransomware or any other breaches that can happen inside the organization. And it's purely human error in most cases. And then we still say that human is the weakest link within every organization. Which leads to the part 3, which is around inside threater. In this instance, we do find that in most cases, there are people that definitely, some is because of negligence, some is because of the weak practices. In some situations, employees are not well trained to be able to even spot a phishing attack or even be able to do a proper hygiene when it comes to changing of password or even reporting for an incident. And also in some instances, you find that employees are still sharing credentials, which can also affect the privilege users being targeted. And we also see in some instances that some people do it deliberately because of maybe they're not happy or an employee was having some issues and they just decide to be a threat to an organization. And then the last but not least is around supply chain. Musa indicated around that. It's quite important in terms of the people that we work with. No one can work alone. Definitely most government department requires partnership through vendors, in some instances third parties within software space. And then with that, they do have access to privileged information. In some instances, we see that a lot of breaches are happening through that angle. And then government is quite important and high target to attackers or to bad actors because of many things that we can look into. Every citizen data is stored. You can imagine having access to the Home Affairs database. When you go to a hospital, all the healthcare information, which is very, very confidential, it's out there. And then also the national infrastructure is part of government, and then that's why it become a very high target. So let's look at the foundation in terms of building this public trust. Is that we need to build on reliability because citizens expect something. They expect systems to work at all the time. Service to remain available, especially when we are pushing to this digital transformation. It's quite crucial to ensure that these services to gain more trust, they must always be online, they must always be available. And then when people do share their information, they expect the government to be able to protect such information. And in an instance where cybersecurity fails, definitely there is a lot of delays when it comes to services that they want them online. And some cases we can see fraud or loss of confidence. If we were to look at some of the real as an example, looking at the Home Affairs system, for example, if it fails or get hit by a cyber attack, a citizen cannot obtain their IDs, passports, which can affect the traveling and also the business continuity for certain business to verify employment verification cannot be done. I am one of the victims on that. I was supposed to travel sometime last year and only to realize my passport has expired. And when I went to Home Affairs, I still had a time window of 3 weeks. When I went to Home Affairs, the system were offline. Not necessarily that they were attacked by a cyber attack, but I was disappointed as a citizen going there and then finding out that the system were offline. I tried a few days and then I was not that much luck. And then online, I managed to do the booking perfectly. That affected me looking at a citizen point of view, and then I felt it was unfair. And then not only it affected me, it also affected the business that I was supposed to do abroad. So I couldn't make it, and then I felt that government failed me. So you can imagine how citizens feel after a disruption of service. So the key important message here is to cybersecurity. We need to make sure that cybersecurity protects our service delivery, and also to enhance the public trust, as well as the ensuring the state legitimacy in things that we do. Looking at cybersecurity as a governance priority, we need to look at 3 key elements, which is redefine it, embed it, and communicate it. Looking at the redefined side of things is that, as my colleague have indicated, cybersecurity is no longer about firewall or tech, about antiviruses. Those are fundamental and they are required. And it is also not an ICT responsibility because should anything happen, we've seen it become an enterprise governance, it becomes a risk management issue, it also become a public accountability issue. How do we now embed that? Cybersecurity must be woven into different activities that we do within our organization, starting with the strategic planning. It must be part of that. When we look at our enterprise risk management, if we don't have cybersecurity in there, we're still missing a lot. We need to ensure that when you do our compliance structure, cybersecurity is included. And then the one that is very critical is around business continuity planning. We cannot have a business continuity planning without accessing what could be the impact or risk associated to cybersecurity. And by defining those, that will enhance our business continuity. And then how do we best do it? We need to ensure that we communicate, speak governance, not attack. So in most cases, we lack in how we also ask for budget or how we mention these ways. For example, instead of saying that the firewall has failed, which you still have to start to indicate what firewall, especially if you're going to be speaking with the executives, which firewall, what is a firewall, but perhaps you can look into things like a control weakness, exposed citizen data, and disrupted service delivery. That definitely does make someone at a senior level to listen to you, because executives do respond to things that are operational impact, things that will have financial impact, things that also hold reputational impacts, and things that are also compliance impact. If you look at a firewall, not having a firewall, definitely that opens a huge hole when it comes to operational impact, also the reputational impact. So when you are addressing these things, especially from an ICT point of view, talking to colleagues that are outside ICT, it's quite crucial to ensure that we mention in languages that they will understand, which is governance language. Let's look at the governance framework alignment. Most of us, we might already be familiar with some framework, and then these cybersecurity, these frameworks do align with cybersecurity. This could be the public finance management, data protection from POPIA point of view, information security from MIS, and then also the governance directive framework. How we align with that is that we need to see the risk. For example, let's look in POPIA in practice. So in this instance, we'll look at the employee data that has leaked due to the weak access controls that you have. So that this is no longer an ICT issue. Yes, it could have been an issue whereby we expect IT to have certain controls in place to be able to block that, but that has already happened. The data has leaked out there. So you become a compliance failure, that became a governance failure, a reputational risk, and as well as a legal exposure. The legal exposure can also be driven from a POPIA side of things, and also in some instances, some companies, organizations, or individuals might feel that they need to exercise their rights. So we need to act on alignment. And then what governance leaders must do is to ensure that all the risk, all the framework that we have indicated on step 1, they need to map cyber control to each framework, and also include cyber risk in audit planning. And then this will mean that we then treat data breaches as a governance event than just an ICT issue or an incident. And then this will help with report the cyber posture to accounting officers in either quarterly basis, depending on the stakeholders meeting within the accounting office team. And then also embed POPIA compliance in procurement. So it's quite crucial that even the people that you work with, they understand how they need to handle their personal information. In this instance, if you do have POPIA role, if you do have your personal information that you have given over to your third party and they misuse it, you might also be reliable and in reputation as well as that institutions that have handed over people's information. How do we now integrate cyber risk into the enterprise risk management? We need to understand that cyber risk is not separate. It all belongs alongside every other enterprise risk. And why this matters is that cybersecurity does not just affect IT, like we indicated. It disrupts a lot of departments. It could be finance, could be operation, and then last but not least, public trust. This will have a financial risk, whereby some budget losses, could also be a reputational risk in terms of the erode public confidence. And then how do we now put this into real practice in terms of the risk? Let's look at a sample registry. For example, we can imagine a ransomware that is targeting a financial system. So which means a finance division needs to have their risk registry with relate to cybersecurity. So they will have things like a risk will be a ransom on financial systems. And the impact will be that there will be a disruption on payroll, which could affect employee not being paid, also affect the supply chain or OEM or vendors not being delayed in payment. What is the likelihood of that? Is quite high for every department in South Africa. It's quite high at the moment. Ransomware is one of the most common attack vectors in SA currently. What are the controls? This way now, finance work with IT. Where are the controls that needs to be perhaps be implemented? This could be a multi-factor authentications, testing the backups that we have, and also ensuring that the entire staff is fully aware in terms of awareness training, which could be done in different forms either individual training or the online-based training. But every department should be able to produce an entry like this, the one that we just showed, as a risk registry on their own department. Step 3 is around strategic action. Digital dependency demands cyber resilience, and then every company, the government is pushing the digital transformation. But government digital dependency on critical service means that cyber resilience is non-negotiable. It's not something that we can look aftermath. So because these services cannot afford to go downtime, the healthcare services, revenue collection services, even some of the public records such as the IDs and Ds that are used in a regular or in a daily basis by different citizens. So cyber resilience is non-negotiable for government's continuity. So it's something that we need to embed on and then ensure that it's integrated within our enterprise risk management. Let's just look at a high level in terms of some of the cyber controls that can help to strengthen governance. This will help to elevate any institution from a governance auditness ready, like I indicated around the MFA, which can help to block any unauthorized access to critical system. So it's another form of way to say that, okay, you have the password, which could be compromised, but at least let's verify with something that you might have. This could be either your phone or your facial, because that's something that we're quite sure that you have. Another thing is to continuously review our access. This could be starting from a normal Active Directory point of view, ensuring that employees that have resigned and no longer having access, also ensuring that those employees that have sensitive or privileged access, they have been monitored in regular basis. And then in every environment, you'll see when we go to the cybersecurity maturity stages, auditing and monitoring of logs is crucial for every department. This helps to verify accountability, number one, and also helps when it comes to recovery and ensuring that we have a better posture. Backup and recovery, I've been run into situations whereby people did have backup, but backup were never tested. They were never even verified if the timeline in terms of sync is happening in the manner that the organization wants based on their policies. And in a situation whereby there is a cyber attack, only then people want to test their backup, and by that time only to realize backup are not working or they don't have sufficient information. So it's quite crucial. And then when it comes to separation of duties, it's important. Within cybersecurity is not IT, it could be part of IT, it could work with IT, but it's quite important to either have a service provider or have people that are helping you when it comes to cybersecurity, not trying to use the same resources across the platform, because this will definitely reduce risk and also ensure that accountability and then the financial process are well aligned. Third-party assessment, this is not supposed to be a question anymore. Third-party integration, it's key to government and non-government institutions. We've seen a lot of banks being a victim of that. And then you can imagine in a government institution. So to do assessment, there are different tool sets out there. There are different methodology out there. Even some of them are questionnaire-based, where you can do things like a third-party risk assessment to access your third parties and ensure that they align to your policies and then your governance processes. The key insight here is to ensure that clean audit only outcomes depend heavily on digital control maturity. So the more you have right tools in place, the better you can come out with a clean audit. Because like I indicated from the beginning, cybersecurity controls are just a foundation to good governance. So looking at the different roles and accountabilities, we'll look at in two different formats. We have a strategic role, we have technical roles, we have assurance roles, and last but not least, we also have operational roles. In this instance, looking at the executive authorities and accounting officers, This way we're looking at, these are the individuals that set governance direction and cyber policies. So the policies get designed from for example, from a risk officer point of view, or it could be in a conjunction with the CIO and other ESCO members. They own the risk accountability at a governance level. So someone within the executive team will own that. And then also the board is well aware of the policies and then the risk associated to the organization. And they also help to allocate resources for cyber resilience. So resources are in two different formats. It's not only the tech, but also the people, to the manpower that needs to deliver that. So these are the executive sponsors that need to ensure that happens. They also assist with strategic oversight of institutional posture. And then looking at this one, this is very interesting part, because now we go to the second part, which is technical. Technical, as you can see, the role of ICT or cybersecurity team is not the ownership or the accountability of cybersecurity issue. However, they are responsible to ensure that whatever controls that have been sponsored by the strategic team has been implemented and then have been maintained regularly, meaning that updates, if it's a firewall, is being implemented accordingly and the rules have been set up. It's not just a tick box. They continuously monitor for threats and detect any incident and be able to act upon those. They do lead when there is an incident. If there's a cyber breach or if there's a ransomware attack, the ICT team and cybersecurity team will lead and respond and help with the recovery. They also do a day-to-day management of cybersecurity operations. Then we go to the third layer, which is the assurance layer. Well, now we are looking at internal audit and risk teams. They provide independent assurance on controls, and they also test the control effectiveness. How do they do that? This could be in a form of maybe penetration testing as well, a normal auditing that they do internal audit, and also they do report on governance posture to leadership. So whatever that IT is doing, the great work that IT is doing, the assurance team will be the one working closely with IT to raise the message to the strategic team. They also validate things like POPIA and the financial management systems or framework compliance. Ensure that the organization is compliant, meaning that we have the right tool set, we have the right people, and then also the policy are not just the name, we're applying them. And the last but not least is around operational, which is everyone, every employee. So one big message that I would like everyone to take is that cybersecurity is everyone's problem. And this slide here just clearly indicates to us that everyone needs to be involved. From a general employee point of view, we're looking at practice daily cyber hygiene. This could be ensuring that they adhere to the policies that the company have shared, report any suspicious
Doctor, are you, oh, there you are back. All right.
Yeah, I don't know what happened to the presentation, but I've come back. Apologies. So then we have they also follow. They need to also follow instruction from a security policy point of view, and then this means that every role contributes to the institutional cyber resilience, from board strategy to the frontline awareness. So looking at compliance without execution is one thing. So we can have a policy, but if we don't execute on our policies, we remain, it's like a policy that is not enforced. It's merely just a suggestion. Attackers don't follow suggestion. They really look forward to having a serious control in place. So most public institutions do have cybersecurity policies in place, yet breaches continue to happen. Not from lack of policy, but this is from failure to operationalize it into a consistent behavior, whereby the staff action don't match document procedures. The gaps also reside within the consistency. In some instances, you find that the head office is well protected, but when you go to the branch offices, they don't even have a firewall. but yet they still have access to the same data or information. Accountability, there's no serious consequences for those who don't follow the rules, and execution, whereby policy exists on paper, but the daily enforcement is not there, or even the monitoring. So the assurance team and IC team are not really applying that, either due to no lack of control or lack of accountability and responsibility. Some of the good practices that we can look into is that employees definitely need to verify banking details before we change. If there's any supplier that says, I've changed my banking details, we need to continuously verify that. And also lock devices when unattended. I've seen people only leaving their laptop open, especially just because they're just going to the bathroom or they're just moving around. But a good practice is to ensure that the device is locked at all times. And also report phishing alerts. And then it's also important for us to classify what we deem as sensitive information currently at the point of code creation than having to have data that's unstructured, and then thereafter we want to still manage that such data. Also, we need to follow procurement controls and verify supplier credentials at all times. So some of the risk behaviors that we do see is around people when they share their credentials or password. This could be because they are sharing a laptop or a computer is one, but those are not good practices at all. Some government officials tend to also use personal email accounts. That's not a good practice, because bad actors can get in through that, and then when you open your personal email within your working device, then that could affect your working device, which then will give access to the bad actors to the organization. Some people do ignore software updates. So those are critical things that we need to look into. But the bottom line here is that cybersecurity posture is determined by what people do every day, not by what policies say. Governance must close the gap between the written intent and also the reality that we face in operation. And we must continuously ask ourselves a question in terms of, when last did your institution audit whether the staff actually follow the cybersecurity policy, or not just whether one exists? For example, if we say that individual must make sure that they have this line of policy and they have MFA activated, is everyone having MFA activated? Do we check on that? Do we do follow up? Let's look at a case study. Especially the good thing I like about the Estonia case study is around cybersecurity transformation, whereby I'm not a fan of acting after an incident has happened, but however, am I still audible?
We had lost you for a minute there.
Apologies for that. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay.
You may proceed.
Thank you. So on this case study that happened, the Estonia cybersecurity transformation, in 2007, they faced a DDoS attack, which was targeting government, banking, media, also across sector for 3 weeks. And it was the first ever nationwide cyber attack on a sovereign state. But what matters a lot is not the crisis itself, but it's how they responded. So the response was very, very great, whereby Tallinn became the host of NATO's cooperative cyber defense, which was initiated in 2008. And also they designed something that they called an X roadmap platform, which is about secure data exchange backbone, connecting all public and private digital services with an end-to-end encryption. One other great thing that they've done was to ensure that the national EID and e-residence program secured with blockchain and backed with the integrity verification. And last, it was around the cyber governance, where they ensure that cyber integrity is integrated into national governance with dedicated strategy and cross-sector coordination. The good thing about that was that if you were to look at in most cases when people face a cyber attack, they will have easily maybe abandoned their e-platform, their e-digital, e-ID, e-residence, ensuring that let's go back to the paper-based because digital, we're getting hacked or we're getting out of service for weeks. But instead, they responded with ensuring that they apply more security, they invest more, they apply more budget, in whereby the outcome, when we're looking at the results in 2024, 100% of government services were already digitalized. And then on the report which was done in 2018, the report which was done in 2024, they ranked second globally when it comes to e-government development index from 6th in 2018. So that's already a huge jump, and it can indicate that the hack not only did it awaken them, but it also helped them to transfer their people and their services. They achieved a score of 96.67 on the National Cybersecurity Index by 2025, which they were ranked third globally. And then the X roadmap or the X platform was adopted by 22 countries to date worldwide. And the reason why I put it out here is because we as South Africa, this is very relevant because as it's increasing very much when it comes to digital dependency, and therefore we do require a more of a proactive cyber governance, not a reactive recovery. So the question is not if, but when. And then the key lesson that we have seen in this case study is that the strong governance with the national collaboration, including also accountability, it results in digital trust and resilience. So how do we build an institution's security culture? So technology is relevant, and it's very necessary, but it's not if it is insufficient. Alone, a tech can't do much. It does require a human intervention from all different angles in an organization. So a culture is the foundation. A strong security culture is not built not alone on technology. It requires a shared values, clear expectations, and also the consistency in behavior across all levels of organization. In terms of the secure institution encouragement, we need to report early, which create a safe place, and then which means as an organization, we must have platforms that allow employees to be able to report. And we must also take accountability, ensuring ownership at all levels, from the board room all the way to the front desk. Collaboration is a key. Security will never be a siloed approach whereby we only look at IT or only look at operation. It's across the board. Every team members needs to be involved. And we need to continuously learning. It's not something that we can do a day once off. Even when it comes to our cybersecurity awareness training in place, we need to ensure that those are continuous. They're not just done once a year. Because threats do change every day, and we're having those training simulation or awareness campaign, they will evolve together with the new threats that are coming through. Leadership behavior does shape a culture. When leaders deprioritize cybersecurity, staff will definitely follow suit. Policies become just a paper-based exercise, and an incident, they go unreported, or even if they're reported, there's no accountability around that. And then vulnerabilities continuously accumulate with no one taking a stance. When leaders champion security by allocating resources in different forms and also participating in trainings and then also showing visible enforcement when it comes to policies, the entire organization mindset does shift. Practical steps for leaders: set the tone from the top, which this includes cybersecurity board agendas. It must also be part of the strategic planning, not because there was an accident, now only the board get informed, but the board must get an overview of a security posture in all the meetings. Invest in people, fund ongoing awareness program, and also role-specific security training for specific department like finance, which get targeted a lot. Reward for positive behavior. So sometimes it's great to do all this training, but We must also work with human behavior. People do love to be rewarded, especially if they are doing something above others. So it's great to reserve some sort of budget to reward employees who are doing great. This could depend on the organization policies in terms of how you reward employees, but it would be great to see those employees who are effective in cybersecurity getting rewarded. That will change the entire culture. Measure and adapt, meaning that be able to track the metrics, and the metrics must be presented to all platforms, meaning from management meeting all the way to team leaders meetings, and then so that individuals are aware of where they stay in their department. Let's look at the cybersecurity roadmap, maturity roadmap. So we understand that everyone wants to be resilient in terms of organizational, in terms of how they participate. But in most cases, we find that there are still departments that have very ad hoc response, meaning there's no formal strategy when it comes to cybersecurity. Incidents get handled as they arise, and then no one really cares. But when we are more into a foundational controls, it means that you do have some sort of foundation, meaning basic policies are there to meaning that, okay, create a password with 8 characters, firewalls are there, antiviruses, but it's still done at a very low level and then only IT focused. But when you have matured to a risk-aligned strategy, it means that now security integrate into institutional risk and governance framework, meaning that what we spoke about, you are starting to apply a bit of that. However, the stage that you want to be in is between at least 3 and 4, whereby the 4, we are saying that you are more into adaptive defense, meaning real-time threat detection using things like security incident event management tool for more proactive monitoring of the incident, and maybe having a security operation center at the outsource or in-house, whereby people are detecting those incidents and responding to them, and you're having the right tools in place to automate certain incidents, to automate certain response, and then you do continuous monitoring of your environment or assessment. Last but not least is the resilient stage, whereby you are now cyber resilient. Security is now fully integrated into a culture and governance and daily operation. So meaning from the board to the C-level, all the way to the ground staff, everyone is fully aware. So now in that level, we then call it cybersecurity is everyone's problem and everyone is aware of that. Just a note from my side in terms of an executive summary, in terms of what we have covered. Let's look at these 5 key elements which can shape the future in the public sector space. A strategic imperative, not an aftermath thought. Let's ensure that cybersecurity defines modern public sector professionalism and must be embedded at the heart of an institution strategy. And also, every public servant is a cyber defense. Resilience begins with individuals who are willing to take responsible and also be able to do a collective action at every level of the organization. Collaboration as a unified force, governance, ICT, audit, risk, and operation must break down silos and work together to secure our institution. And not forgetting our public, whereby the public trust demands on secure services. And these secure services means citizens depend on government to safeguard their data and also deliver resilient services they can trust at all times. Last is around protecting what matters most. At its core, cybersecurity safeguards people, public services, and the credibility of the state. We've seen from different examples that my colleague Musa have alluded, and even some of the examples that I have given throughout my presentation. So this one is over to you. You need to lead the conversation. These are the questions for senior leaders, which you need to ask yourself, say, what cybersecurity threat could trail your mandate tomorrow? If you don't have that answer today, you need to go back to the drawing board and ensure these are something that you can answer immediately. Does cybersecurity risk sit on your governance agenda or only in your IT department? That's a great question to ask because it's not an IT responsibility. It is a organizational responsibility. So it needs to be within governance and IT supporting. Which everyday behavior are your biggest security blind spots? If you don't know your blind spots, then during the time of a cyber attack, it will be like a nightmare. Are your teams collaborating on cyber resilience or working in silos? So again, this is one of the great questions, as we've seen that if we work in silos, we will never achieve everything. We need to really collaborate and ensure that we don't rely heavily on IT to solve everything, even the matters that are heavily our department risk. By that, thank you. If you have any question, we'll take the question at the end of the section.
Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you very much, Doctor. I think this is a very insightful webinar. I never thought of it like this. I thought I'm going to hear a lot of technical IT terms. So I can safely say this webinar actually is demystifying cybersecurity in the public sector. What I pick up here, and the most important message is that cybersecurity is everyone's business. It is everyone's business, and then that must practice, I like that, cyber hygiene, keep it clean, be vigilant, and then why it matters that citizens may lose access to services, but also erodes legitimacy. It erodes legitimacy in a sense that actually, for example, you reference to municipalities which are led by mayors. If there's a disruption in service delivery, the mayor may lose the political fortunes. So it is also the mayor's responsibility, as much he or she is a politician, to make sure that there is cybersecurity in the municipality through working with the officials that are tasked to do that within the organization, and of course, working together with all the employees. I'm going to call on our last speaker on this, Professor Caroline Thompson, who is going to speak on building a cyber-conscious public sector, collaboration, capability, and culture. And on that note, like I said, a cyber-conscious public sector, meaning that cybersecurity is everyone's business. Prof, over to you.
Thank you so much, Bongani. Good morning, everybody. Very exciting to be here to discuss with my colleagues from ITPSA 6 Cyber this very important topic of cybersecurity. Right, if I share my screen, share my slides, trust everyone is able to see that. As I said, it's really great for us to be here. It's really important for us that these kind of conversations are happening more often and with different stakeholders who all have a part to play when it comes to cybersecurity. As mentioned previously, my name is Kerry Lynn Thompson. I'm the current director of the School of Information Technology at Nelson Mandela University. I'm also the director of CRIX, which is our Center for Research in Information and Cybersecurity. And I'm the current chair of our IITPSA SIG Cyber, which is our special interest group in cybersecurity. Now, what's really great is that Musa and Doctor have already laid a very solid foundation for what I'm going to be speaking about, where they've emphasized the importance of cybersecurity for everybody, that it is a crucial governance or governance of cybersecurity plays a crucial part in securing our organizations and the public sector. And what I want to do in this last talk this morning is look at how we go beyond governance. And Doctor sort of transitioned into this at the end, which gives me a perfect segue to start talking about security conscious public sector. How do we go from governance and policy into actual behavioral change in our various departments, in the various public sector entities? And there I'm going to be looking at 3 pillars, which is collaboration, capability, and culture, and looking at certain gaps in cybersecurity and how we need to work together to address those gaps. Now, just to highlight, as Musa said in the first talk, a number of different cyber attacks out there. He mentioned the 4 primary types that threaten the public sector. But to look at it from a global point of view, very applicable in South Africa as well. And there's many different reports that exist out there. This particular one is from Aon, their 2025 Global Cyber Risk Report, where we can clearly see that our top 3 initial attack vectors are related to people. About 85%, if we look at our malware and our ransomware, we know things like ransomware that requires a human being to click on a link, or for us to, in the second type of attack, give our credentials away through unauthorized access or social engineering. And then we have our human factors, which could be human error in terms of configurations on firewalls. It could be just us in our day-to-day workflow and operations and how we click on something we shouldn't or share something we shouldn't. So very much when it comes to successful attacks, nowadays it exploits human behavior, not technology. Of course, there are those attacks that will exploit technology exclusively and not involve human beings. But we've increased the attack surface for our cyber criminals. We are vulnerable, and there's a concept of social engineering that Dr. mentioned, and that's very much hacking the human. It's a lot easier to ask me for my username and password rather than to go and hack a database that perhaps has some encryption or obstacles that I need to get over. And in today's day and age with AI, with things like deepfakes, misinformation, malinformation that's out there, it's so difficult for us as people in our day-to-day, whether it's at work or at home or with our families, to really know what's real. And cyber criminals rely on that to exploit us, unfortunately. So how do we take the governance, the best intentions of organizations, and make sure that us as the people in the public sector are doing our part to protect our organizations? Because cybersecurity most often fails, and I'm saying not because of lack of policy or technical controls. Of course, there are organizations out there that don't have governance policies. They don't have the required technical controls. But let's say we go and do all that. We meet all the governance requirements. We are compliant. We have all the technical controls. There are potentially still gaps in our cybersecurity. And I wanted to highlight 3 of those today. The first, and Dr. alluded to this, is the policy practice gap. Very often, and we'll go into this in more detail, policies are there as a piece of paper, as a checkbox exercise for compliance, and it's left at that. We need to look at how do we plug the gap of translating that policy into practice. The second gap is that it's easy to say, oh, well, cybersecurity is everyone's job. Everyone needs to be secure. We need to give, well, we're giving that responsibility, that accountability to people, but are we doing enough to upskill our employees to really know what it is they need to be doing in the organization? And then finally, and Musa and Dr. both spoke to this, and it's really an important one that we see all the time, is this ownership gap. Who is responsible for cybersecurity? Because if I think it's the cybersecurity team, that's their job. I don't have to worry myself. I'm secured by the firewalls and the encryption and the intrusion prevention and detection. It's not my responsibility. I'm not taking ownership for it. And that's where it brings in vulnerabilities in our organization, potentially. So let's look at how we can plug these gaps with regard to the 3 pillars that I mentioned earlier: the collaboration, capability, and culture. And ultimately, the collaboration, the communication that needs to happen, the building of our capabilities, ideally, we want to see this translate into a cybersecurity culture. So let's start with collaboration. And when it comes to the policy practice gap, there are, of course, national policies, provincial policies, local, regional policies, etc. But it's really important then when we look at cybersecurity policies that in formulating these policies that there's input from a collaboration point of view from various departments into policies, and that it is not just seen as, oh, this is IT's job, this is the cybersecurity's team job to put this policy together, and it's a checkbox, and we keep this policy to one side, and we are compliant. We really need to collaborate and engage with various departments to make sure that any kind of concerns are addressed or represented potentially in a policy. Secondly, this is the important part, is there's a lot of organizations and perhaps even at a national level where we have things like our National Cybersecurity Policy Framework. And is that being operationalized? Is it being translated into practical procedures per function, per department? Because if this isn't being done, it remains a policy. It remains something that is there. Policies are notoriously difficult to read. It's not something that anyone's really going to take up and just read for the fun of it. Procedures contextualize and make the policies relevant for different people and different functions. And then it's about the communication. So it's great to collaborate. We put these policies, we put these procedures together. Now we need to communicate this to employees in various sectors, in various organizations, in various departments. So what is this policy? What do these procedures mean for your job? And if we don't do that, if we don't contextualize things, policies, and cybersecurity in particular, when it comes to policies, remains vague. It remains abstract. And unfortunately, and Dr. mentioned this, sometimes cybersecurity only becomes relevant for someone after they've experienced an incident. And in looking at cybersecurity, building a culture, we're trying to prevent cybersecurity incidents as much as possible. Right, so we have this foundation of collaboration, we get people's input, we communicate these policies and procedures. How do we build our capability, our skills of our people in the organization? As mentioned, we want to take our policies, we want to translate them into procedures, which are typically step by step. This is what, the policy says this is what I need to do, this is how I do it. And then there's an interesting concept of translating procedures even further into cybersecurity playbooks, which makes it a little bit more tangible, because these playbooks look at scenarios. They're scenario-based learning, which is very contextualized. To say, right, I'm in finance, here's a scenario. I get a request from a third-party vendor that we communicate with all the time. What do I do? How do I process this? What is the secure procedure to move forward? Also, in terms of capability and supporting the skills of our people, it's really important that from a technical point of view, it's one thing to say, well, people are responsible, they need to do the right thing. But what the policies and procedures say, it's important that technical controls are integrated into our systems to automate things as much as possible. Automate security controls so that people don't necessarily need to actually integrate and use those controls. In terms of prompts, prompt people when it comes to security things that they need to remember, and try to integrate these things into the everyday working of our employees. And then in part of collaboration, we said there needs to be these workshops to say, well, what does the policy mean for your job? That's very much awareness raising. But when it comes to capability and the policy into practice, it's got to go beyond generic awareness. It's one thing to say, be secure. Cybersecurity is important. We need to get to role-based training, where again, we make it relevant, we contextualize the cybersecurity procedures and playbooks for our employees. And if we can do that, if we can lay the foundation, we are very conscious of, we want to move from policy to behavioral change, policy to practice. We lay the foundation with collaboration and upskilling and capabilities, and then not overnight, but over time, with consistency, we start building the cybersecurity culture, where policy becomes more than compliance. And that's a really important part, is to say that yes, we can be fully compliant by having the policies and procedures in place, but we need to go beyond that. Policy needs to translate into, this is how we work. This is how we do things around here, which essentially means it's been integrated into the culture, because that is what culture does. This is the way we do things. Our workflows, our jobs are inherently secure. The way to encourage this is constant reinforcement from management to show that this is really important from a holistic company point of view. Things like simulation exercises, phishing simulations, to keep security at top of people's minds, as well as build their confidence in being able to spot a phish, for example. And Dr. mentioned this as well. We need to go beyond in terms of encouraging behavior change. We need to recognize good practice versus compliance. People who go above and beyond, and they move beyond needing to check the procedures, perhaps, because I know the procedures well enough and I believe in them, that they're important. I've integrated these into my day-to-day operations. Then if we move on to our second gap, addressing our skills responsibility. So saying we need to upskill our employees in order for them to take on the responsibility and the accountability of being cybersecurity aware and conscious in our organizations. In terms of collaboration, communication, we've mentioned this as well. It is so important and so foundational to setting up a security conscious public sector, is we need to define a shared responsibility model. This goes a long way to raise awareness, but really to put it down on paper. What does IT do? What are their boundaries? What are their responsibilities versus what do users do? What do employees do? What does management do? What do line managers do in terms of the responsibilities for cybersecurity? Something that works exceptionally well in getting people on board, and research has showed this numerous times, is that it's really important in order to get people on board, we can't just stop at training or awareness. It's really good to pair departments within an organization with security specialists. And when I say security specialists, it doesn't have to be cybersecurity professionals as in the people who configure the firewalls, but people who are identified as security champions or security ambassadors. And what this does is it encourages peer learning networks. So if I'm not sure about something, I don't know where to find a procedure, or there's a scenario that hasn't been catered for and I'm not sure what to do, there is a champion, there is a person that I can reach out to ask for clarity or to get support or to get help. These security champions are also responsible for going and promoting security as part of everyone's job. And these security champions could come from external to the department as a security specialist. But what works really well is finding people within departments, within business units, who are already convinced that cybersecurity is vital to their jobs and to the department. They know the department, they know the culture, and they can work within that in order to promote cybersecurity. When it comes to capabilities and skills, we've mentioned this role-specific or role-based learning, and they have mentioned that it needs to be continuous. And we're not talking every day, but very often cybersecurity training is seen as a once-off, perhaps once every year, once every other year. And again, it's about compliance, not about behavior change. We need to make sure our skills are continuously, or our employees are continuously upskilled. And things like micro-learning are so important. These are small little bites of cybersecurity training that are there to introduce new topics, or perhaps as reminders to things that have already been covered. It's really important for our employee skills that we build practical competence. And this is why it has to go beyond awareness. There's one thing to stand up in training and say, everyone needs to be secure, or your password needs to be strong. I'm sure everyone's heard that, but how do you do that? Where's the practical competence in creating a password? Or when have you used a tool that could perhaps help you, like a password manager, to actually create these and secure these more complex passwords that can be used on multiple platforms? And that's again up to the organization to provide that training and those tools to translate this awareness into actual practical, operationalized skills each day. Now, when we're talking about cybersecurity skills, I think when we talk about cybersecurity in general, and Bongani mentioned this as well, you think cybersecurity, you think technical, you think firewalls, encryption perhaps, or all these technical terms and terminology that's going to come out. And I'm certainly not saying for us as employees in organizations that we need to be cybersecurity specialists or cybersecurity professionals. But all of us, whether it's in our professional capacity, at work, or at home, you know, we're not disconnected when we go home. We have kids at home. We need to have basic cyber hygiene for everybody in our organization. So there's 3 layers of cybersecurity skills to ultimately get to this culture that we want. Foundational awareness for everyone, all staff, in the case of our university, all students, of course, as well. And there we deal with the stuff everybody needs to know. Cyber hygiene, password management, data handling. What should I share? What shouldn't I share? Social media could be included there as well. Phishing awareness. What do you look out for? What do you not click on when you receive these emails? Second to that, as I mentioned, we've got to go beyond awareness. We've got to get into the training, and that's where our role-based practical competence comes in. For example, so everyone gets the foundational awareness, but then we go to procurement, for example, and we say, right, this is the translation of the policy into your procedures. Here's your playbook. Here's how you go about securing sourcing. Or if you're in HR, perhaps an insider risk awareness. What role should HR play in terms of who is being hired? What kind of checks and balances could there be in terms of employees in the organization? Musa mentioned the insider threat is a very real one within the public sector, within any organization, really. And then managers. And this cannot be overemphasized. We'll chat about it again when we get to the ownership gap. But executives, management, the board, line managers, in terms of taking on cybersecurity risk ownership as well. And then, of course, the third layer is probably the one that we think about most when we hear cybersecurity. We think about our incident response teams and cybersecurity professionals who, of course, need to be experts and at the top of their game. How does this get into a culture? And the reality is, and this has been mentioned by our previous speakers as well, we can have the best skills that are out there. We can have a workforce that is very much up to speed with what's going on. And there's a lot of research that's done in terms of, because we're so busy and we're multitasking so much, even if I know the theory, even if it's part of my daily practice, because I'm juggling so many things, it actually, that often that distractedness that we're busy with, that leads us to click on something. And perhaps as soon as we click on something, we realize we shouldn't have. And then we can report that. And hopefully the cybersecurity, our specialists, would be able to plug the vulnerability. But it's not always, even if things become a culture, it's not always an option to avoid these cybersecurity vulnerabilities that happen. And we can all fall victim to cybersecurity attacks. And because of that, it's vitally important, I believe, that cybersecurity culture, we have to move, if it was at all, we have to move from blame to supporting our employees. We cannot be, someone clicks on a link accidentally. It cannot be all about them and about them being punished. We have to have an environment that makes it safe to say, I don't know, I'm going to ask someone, or I've made a mistake. Because very often the instinct of people is, I clicked on something, I realized I shouldn't have, I'm just going to keep quiet and I'm going to hope no one notices. Where in fact, when you click on something you shouldn't, there's very often there's a vulnerability that's been exposed and your cybersecurity team needs to know immediately, and you need to know the reporting structure to do that. So we need to create a culture that promotes learning over punishment. Of course, there needs to be disciplinary if someone has blatantly done something wrong. But when it is an accidental incident that occurs, we need to look at remedial action. And here I really love the philosophy of safety science, where it's used in environments where employees are perhaps working in warehouses or conditions where they may get physically injured. And they say if someone does get injured on duty, they don't look to and say, oh, the employee did something wrong. They look at the entire system, the holistic system and environment to say, yes, this went wrong, but what could we do better? So for example, if an employee clicks a link they shouldn't, it's not about blaming that employee. It's looking at the bigger picture and saying, well, how did that link even end up in the inbox of that employee? What about our filters? What about our firewalls? What about not allowing unauthorized access, for example? So it very much needs to look at, there was an incident, the bigger picture, the more holistic culture of how do we do better going forward. And then finally, our gap on ownership. And ownership comes down to taking responsibility at the end of the day, making sure we don't think, oh, this is someone else's job to do in our environment. So in terms of collaboration, communication, again, you'll see this is the same with everything. When it comes to ownership, policy, skills, interdepartmental within an organization, interdepartmental across local government, perhaps provincial, national, we need to have conversations and establish cyber risk committees that are able to speak to these cyber policies that should be guiding our actions. We need to embed cybersecurity, and our previous speaker said this, into the bigger picture, enterprise risk management, strategic planning. This is not an ad hoc. It should not be an ad hoc. It should not be an afterthought, which unfortunately cybersecurity often is. It needs to be part of strategic planning for the entire organization. We should go as far, I believe, to embed cybersecurity as a performance metric across various teams, and something that we use as KPIs to see whether, yes, people are doing their job, but are they doing it in a secure way? In terms of building that kind of capability and allowing people to realize the part they should play in owning cybersecurity, we spoke about a shared responsibility model. We need accountability structures as well. Who is responsible on paper, in policies, procedures? Who are the data owners? Who are the system owners, risk owners throughout organizations? Leaders, we're saying to leaders and executives, you need to be aware of cyber security. We need to provide our leaders, our managers, our executives with easily accessible information. Where is a cyber risk dashboard, perhaps, that they can feed into a decision-making framework for our managers? And executives, I'm very passionate about this in terms of our executives must be trained in cyber risk literacy. We need to be doing things like tabletop exercises, simulating if something goes wrong, what is the department or the organization's response to a cyber incident that needs to occur. To do this, we ultimately need, again, it's the foundation of collaboration, capability, moving into culture. We need to get to a culture where cybersecurity is not the add-on. It's not ad hoc. It is seen as part of business resilience. No compromise. It's not oh yes, we still need to do that. It's how do we leverage cybersecurity for business resilience? To do this, leadership, our executives, our management must own cybersecurity. They must visibly own that risk and talk about it regularly. Again, research shows something that is led from the top more quickly becomes part of the culture. And we need to promote this culture. I say again, the no blame culture, but also this mindset for everyone in terms of ownership. If you are using digital systems, you are part of cybersecurity and you have a role to play. Right, so just in summary about what I've said there in terms of those gaps and plugging those gaps, very much from a human factor, behavioral point of view, to take governance that step further and not leave it as a piece of paper, to create our security conscious public sector, which ultimately means cybersecurity becomes a part of the way we do things. Key takeaways for each of our pillars. For collaboration, and it's in the word, collaboration is not about silos. It's not about isolation. It is about collaboration, communication. No single department within an organization, no particular business unit can secure the public sector on its own. And very often this is what is seen. There's no centralized collaboration that is happening. There's very much decentralized. People are doing things, but perhaps in these silos and not communicating with one another. Once we get that collaboration going, we get the interdepartmental collaboration going, we move on to the capability. And this is where, if we're talking about a secure public sector, it's distributed capabilities, distributed skills, not isolated expertise. As we've mentioned throughout this morning, it does not rest with our cybersecurity specialists or professionals. Their isolated expertise or expertise is required, of course, in terms of protecting our systems and infrastructure. But we very much have a part to play, a distributed part to play in terms of our capabilities and the role that we play in terms of cybersecurity skills. And ultimately, we want to get to a culture which, as I said, it takes time, it takes effort, it takes consistency in the same messages and highlighting and keeping the skills and the collaboration and the capabilities going. Because culture, ultimately, it's the way we do things, and it's the difference between compliance, which compliance is all too often check, check, check. I've got what needs, this standard says I need this, I've done that, I'm compliant, sure. But is my organization, is the public sector resilient when it comes to cybersecurity? And not if, but when cyber incidents occur, how easily do we manage these risks? How easily do we respond to these risks? And how resilient are we in bouncing back after these cybersecurity incidents? Right, so that is it from me. I think we are going into our Q&A time as well, so I will pause right there.
Thank you very much, Prof, for that. Very interesting as well. You speak about creating a good ecosystem for cybersecurity, and then that also what we need to do in terms of practice. We must move from policy to more like established procedures. And I think very clear procedures that needs to be understood by everyone. So these procedures must be written in a clear language, very simple, accessible language, and where possible, actually try to make it visual so that everyone can understand. So thank you for that presentation. What we're going to do right now, I'm going to call on Mr. Mlangeni to facilitate the Q&A session based on all the three insightful presentations that we have received today. Over to you, Mr. Mlamli.
Thank you, Bongani. Thank you very much. We don't have too many questions in the question box, so if everybody on the call has questions, can you please populate them in there? So far, we have about 4. And I'll kick off with the first one to the panel. So the first one is from Mr. Justin Fussell. His question is cybersecurity in high demand in South Africa? Are there many jobs and vacancies available for it? So I guess he's trying to establish the job market potential for cybersecurity. Yeah.
I'm happy to jump in there, Mlamli. Thanks very much.
Okay. No, you can go ahead, Prof.
Thanks so much, Doc. Yes, so the short answer is yes. There is a huge skills gap when it comes to cybersecurity, not just in South Africa, but globally. I think more recently, because we just had a conversation about this last week, there were over something like 1,200 jobs being advertised in the cybersecurity space in South Africa recently. So there are a lot of jobs. But we're also hearing from industry that they are struggling to fill those jobs. So meaning that there's obviously greater demand than there is supply at the moment. But just, and I'm going to let Dr. and obviously Musa comment as well here, but I just wanted to mention when it comes to cybersecurity skills and jobs, what we see very often with cybersecurity, which makes it quite unique, is people come into cybersecurity often with not from an IT background, not from a technical background. More and more people are coming in from law, for instance, or from auditing or accounting. School teachers coming in, they're used to communicating and training and teaching. They come in from a cybersecurity awareness point of view. So I think just from that, if we're talking job market, cybersecurity, don't think because you don't have a technical background that limits you. If you think, oh, cybersecurity sounds pretty interesting, there's definitely gaps in the market, have a look at how your current skills are translatable into the cybersecurity space.
Dr. and Musa, do you have anything else to add, or?
Okay, yeah, no, I can add on that. No, I think Prof already indicated a lot around it, but like indicated, the jobs are there in the market, but interesting enough, we're publishing an article around something around this because I think there's a lack of collaboration, and we all do agree that from an academic side, and then when we look at the industry side, the demand in terms of the type of individuals that the industry requires and the type of skills that the university are handling. We do understand that mostly it's theory, and then when you look at our environment, you saw on Ms. presentation that there's a lot of attacks. You really require someone that's going to come in and do something. But definitely, industry are doing their best to really recruit from graduate programs and things like that. But there's always a gap because of such a demand. But yeah, thank you.
Perfect. I think the two speakers have captured everything and have encapsulated it. There's always something to tackle when it comes to recruitment and maintaining an active pipeline. What we've seen, across the sector, cybersecurity is already built to grow. And if we look at the projections in terms of what that sector and the industry is going to be by 2030, for example, it's going to grow significant, and that means lots of potential. There's need for new skills, a new perspective to be brought in. But really, is how do we organize? How do we get an entry level and try to reduce the barrier to entry into the sector for different individuals with different backgrounds? I think that's where the industry needs to organize that, and different stakeholders need to play a role. The academia, the industry, business, public sector needs to come in and help address this, shortfall by the potential that the industry has. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the second question is, what is the impact of delayed governance? So the lack of formal AI regulation, for example, how is that impacting the assurance side of GRC? So from a GRC perspective, how is the lack of formal regulation impacting?
I can take this. So we have to strike a delicate balance between regulation and innovation. And really, it's been a main concern for many organizations and research institutes, leading organizations in every sector, especially in the AI, for instance. They're concerned that if regulations is pushed hard across this, innovation, it could it could become counterproductive, and it could, reduce the potential within that to unlock such potential. But at the same time, many industry leaders in that sector have highlighted the potential for, the need for responsible use of AI and even innovation and how it is evolved. I think what is critical is to be able to achieve that balance, to be able to understand that, yes, it cannot go unregulated, but at the same time, those stakeholders that need to participate in this sector, in finding out what regulation should look like, must be stakeholders who are, equipped and have the skills and the knowledge as well as to define what regulation should look like within the AI domain.
No, thank you, Musa. And then I think adding on that, just bringing to realities that their adoption, or how quick they go or how slow they go, it won't really change the reality of what we are facing. We have seen it when with the cloud. Company is still resisting that, okay, we're not transforming cloud. But in terms of the user base, in terms of the access, in terms of the software base that they will have to use, already cloud. So if you don't adapt, from a jersey point of view, if you don't adapt to have a policy and a strategy upfront, the people will end up using that. In AI, we are seeing a lot of that, even on normal organizations that haven't adapted to that or have policies around that. We do find that users are still using those technologies, and then some of the software base are already empowered by that. So it's a matter of saying that, are we going to embrace technology, or are we going to allow regulation to delay us? So, but in most cases, regulation does catch up later into the game.
Yeah, and just to mention from my side as well, obviously, things that are, and perhaps not so much from a regulation point of view. I mean, like Doc says, regulation will catch up, but that doesn't stop within organizations. There needs to be that governance of things like AI and IT and technologies in general. I think Musa, you said under 2 months to reach 100 million users, which was so interesting. That's in our organizations. People are using it on work devices, on personal devices. Do our IT team even know what's running? Are we aware from a security point of view what we're putting into these AI chatbots or whatever we're using? I take a policy, a confidential document, and I put it into AI and I ask it to summarize. Where's that information going? So, the regulations are one thing, but within the organization as well, there needs to be that governance and regulation of that shadow IT or the shadow AI that's running there in the network and in the organization, that perhaps our cybersecurity professionals aren't aware of everything that's being used as well.
Thank you. So the third question would be, what is the role of CETA in securing the government ecosystem? So why should every department have their own mini SOCs when CETA is there pretty much to, yeah. So that's what this, that's what the question is saying. Yeah. So why should every department have their own mini SOC when CETA is?
Yeah, no, I think it's a very interesting question, because definitely we're not talking from a government side of things. But if you look at it, that similar to the last question, whereby if a state entity that is responsible for perhaps to form I would call it a national SOC that other department, municipalities, and other government can utilize, it then leaves those departments on their own. And then with a number of attacks, every department, I believe, they have their own responsibility and certain regulation that they need to adhere to. So if companies are going out there to form that, I believe, because maybe CETA doesn't have that capability as yet. And again, it goes to the governance point of view. If we are driving cybersecurity in a silo-based, we end up having situation like this, whereby a state-owned entity that's supposed to be responsible for ICT related in government. They don't have something like a national SOC that can be consumed as a multi-service tenant. And then again, to touch on that again, you find that it's not driven from a top leadership. If cybersecurity was driven from all the way from parliament, all the way to the president, all the way down, definitely you'll find that that mandate is being achieved and can be achieved, as we have seen on the case study that I presented. The case study did indicate that immediately when everyone started collaborating, they started to change everything. And then as we speak today, they are 100% operating on all government services. And then if you have transformed your government to be to transform digitally 100%, definitely things like a SOC on a state entity like CETA to service everyone, it will be a must.
Yeah, and yeah, I love the question because it does talk to, yes, we have CETA whose responsibility is that centralized SOC and they've got their responsibilities. But I think to say, oh, you know, the mini SOCs in the departments or within a decentralized level, I think that speaks to the ownership of cybersecurity. I think it's important that we do look and say, yes, CETA has a role to play, but how can we assist? And perhaps the mini SOC is the supportive structure that CETA needs in order, you know, to do their job, because it's very difficult for CETA as well to be able to see into a particular department and be aware of absolutely all the risks, you know, everything that's there on the ground level. Whereas the department, you would be much more informed as to who your people are, the existing culture, that sort of thing that could be fed up to CETA. So, you know, it's very much supportive. CETA has their role, absolutely, but it's about that ownership to me that needs to be decentralized and distributed.
Absolutely. I'll just add on that there's also an issue of privacy and data security across those different departments and units. There has to be some data segregation, and the data needs to belong where it should be, because it also talks on how this data requires protection. So having a centralized point of view and managing all of that is great, but individually within this system has to have direct responsibility and ownership, like Prof has mentioned.
Thank you very much for that. There's another question here. So is there a function that one can access for best practice documents for policies, specifically for state-owned enterprises, that departments can customize to fit their own environment? So I'm not sure if such a place or such a function exists.
Yeah, so basically, I don't think there is a centralized repository or a policy library where you can go and access things. You know, that together with a central place to report cyber incidents, I think is something that is needed, where you can go almost the one-stop shop to go and find these policies, access the policies, see what's relevant, filter as needed, and then be able to customize for you. But there's no central repository as yet that's been operationalized.
Thank you very much, Prof. The last one, no, actually not the last one. So we have about two more after this one. So in the era of AI-powered cyber threats, how can organizations proactively detect and counteract attacks that continually evolve through automated learning and adversarial adaptation, especially when traditional security measures struggle to keep pace? And also, how can businesses address third-party risk factors?
Let me just give an example of one particular use case where we dealt with when it comes to AI-powered cyber attacks. And really, it comes at the core of the behavior, and that is how this issue was able to be resolved. So there is a credit card company in the US where they allow credit card services to check against the validity of a credit card and what the conditions are associated with this card. Now, what they noticed is there was a user that was bringing in multiple credit cards and checking against their system, and basically circumventing all of their processes and their protocol. Because as you can imagine, AI agents, checking credit cards, they have a specific pattern in which they do it. They're so effective and so efficient. If a user was simply checking a credit card against a database to check the details across that, it's easy to be able to see that. But then they noticed a pattern where there was thousands of credit cards that were checked against their system in a particular format. And in fact, it was doing that, in a distributed manner across multiple states in the US. Now, they had to recognize a pattern that was out of their normal operating principle and conditions. And so they reached out and they wanted help. How do we put a system in place to be able to detect when an agent is checking or performing an operation within our system? It comes to that point, to understand that this is the normal operating conditions for systems, and this is what abnormal looks like. And when we detect an anomaly, how do we then respond to that? Do we completely block such a behavior or such an operation without compromising legitimate users who require the services? It comes to, putting in systems in a way that they can detect behavior that is different from what the baseline is and out of the threshold as well. Now, in terms of third-party risk management, we saw with supply chain, for example, it's one of the easiest attacks that happens. Supply chain, where you're dependent on a particular service provider in order to keep your processes and your businesses running. Attackers compromise such an environment, or you are exposed by reason of your engagement and consumption of this third-party service. You need to have a structured third-party risk management in place where you are performing continuous, checks and validation against your third-party risk service provider to ensure that you are on the same page as you started a year ago, that your service provider has not defaulted on some of their obligations, whether to the regulators in which sector they operate, or at the same time with regards to the contractual obligation. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Musa. No, I think Musa already explained, at least gave a great use case, but in simple terms, like you already indicated, to have right system in place, traditional tools definitely won't be able to pick up things that are done in AI. Hence, a lot of technology vendors out there, they're embedding AI into their technology. And the last question that was asked, I think it was the second or first, where they were asking, how does AI regulation affect AI? AI, it's either we're gonna be having a lot of our tech while waiting for regulation, or be adapting to technologies that will be able to combat that. There are things that we cannot no longer wait for to analyze with our traditional tools. For example, having a 24/7 operation SOC, maybe from CITAL, from an organization. Those teams, they have technologies, or they apply technologies that can be able to detect some of these abnormal activities within the critical systems.
Yeah, and if I can just say, so to echo what Dark and Musa have said, is fight fire with fire. Make sure that there's AI to detect the AI. But from a people point of view, I really think we need to, as part of a cybersecurity culture, is promote a zero trust mindset. We already have zero trust architecture. We should have, ideally, it's a great way to secure systems, is in terms of our network and our infrastructure. But from a people point of view, zero trust is not meaning, oh, we don't trust anybody. It's about establishing trust. So when you get this phone call from someone that you think you know, or a third-party vendor, or communication from them that seems a bit odd, or it's about establishing the trust, confirming this communication is from the party who says it is, before engaging and potentially exposing the organization or yourself to vulnerabilities. And when it comes to AI, I mean, I'm sure we've all seen videos where it's becoming so difficult to pick up what is real and what's not. And that zero trust, establishing trust before we engage, I believe going forward is going to be very, very important for us.
Thank you very much, Prof. And I think this following question here hops on what you just alluded to now regarding zero trust. So adopting that culture. So what are the mechanisms that can be used to facilitate the transition from just policy compliance to actual cultural adaptation?
Do we have a few more hours? So many of these questions, I mean, we could actually just expand on this in further workshops, perhaps. But, it's a great question in terms of cultural adoption. Culture, as I mentioned, it's not overnight. It's very much a longitudinal, conscious effort that management, that organizations need to make in terms of, it starts with convincing people when it comes to cybersecurity that it is for them. They need to own that cybersecurity, realize the role that they need to play, and then be on board with figuring out, well, what does that mean for my job? What does that mean to my day-to-day? And for something to be culturally adopted, it is literally, it's the way we do things. And sometimes when something becomes so embedded in a culture, you ask, well, why do you do it like that? Oh, I'm not sure. That's just the way we do things. And ideally, that should be, with cybersecurity. And I always think about driving. When there's the moving from when you first start driving and you're in a car, everything you do is a conscious action, and you're checking this manual and you're checking this test and this, what does the rule say again? What does that sign mean? And it's a very conscious thing. Now, for me to go and teach someone to drive, I'd have to really think about, oh yeah, how do I change gear again? Because it's something that is just intrinsic to what I do. It's become part of what I do, and I don't give a lot of thought to it. A very simplistic example, but that's ideally where we need the cybersecurity to be. It's not, it becomes part of how we do things. It is a culture, but that takes time. It takes consistency and that messaging going out about how we all have a role to play.
Yeah. No, thank you. And then if you look at it again, it goes to say this needs to be delivered from the top. So especially when it comes to awareness training, I'll give an example as a use case around awareness training, whereby maybe there's a training that the organization is trying to push around, but you find that it's not aligned to KPIs. So there's no mandate for an employee to find that they have to comply to that. But if from an organization point of view, make sure that most of these cybersecurity culture that we want to embed, they are also aligned to our entire risk platform, and also align with the HR management decision systems situation, and also with the C-level. If we have a training, everyone must be part of that, because those are also the people that get targeted. And when employees see that everyone is participating, they also do take it a bit serious. So it's just a type of mindset more than what the technology can do, and then what we can say, but more of delivering from the top.
Thank you, Doc. So final question, and that actually hops on what you just spoke about now. So, which is the awareness aspect of things. So, how often should organizations conduct cybersecurity awareness programs, looking at the rate at which AI is evolving?
No, it depends, right? But I think the most practical one is to have the awareness program, the simulation tools in place, whereby when users do report a certain, or when they fall threat to that, then they're put to a certain training. And also measuring your phishing awareness, your phishing attacks that are coming through. So if you're in a connection that you are receiving a lot of phishing attacks, it means that you have to keep up with your speed. So it depends on organization basis, but again, you have to have a tool more than just maybe quarterly training that you can run face-to-face and then running some exercise with the team so that they can be more aware. But having a tool in place and then also regular testing them, that can change the mindset. And then for those who do attend the training, maybe you can have training set up in a quarterly basis, for example. And if they do attend the training and they don't fall victim, then they wait for another quarter. But if they do attend training and yet fall victims of some test that you do, simulation test that you do, then they have to continuously be trained. So it's also a user risk-based training that needs to take place.
Absolutely. That's spot on. And I would add that you need to be driven by the data. And this, we have a use case for it. And if you are running multiple simulations across a short period of time, it could have a counterproductive effect. You have to study the data of that specific environment where you're running the simulation attacks. And there you can look at a data point and it will drive in terms of what the frequency should look like. Take, for instance, like password, hygiene. There's nuances there that shows the frequent password change has actually resulted in a weaker password. You look at employees who are required to change their password every 30 days, and after which you are not required to use the last 3 passwords in that specific environment. The data has shown that over time, after multiple cycles of password resets, the password becomes much weaker. It may still comply with the password policy, in terms of the length, the complexity, the history and age. But in reality, it becomes something easily for attackers to guess or to use password cracking tools to guess. So don't run it too frequent. It could become counterproductive, where employees could even have, an adverse reaction or response to it. But also don't give it too much period in time in which employees can forget when there's a new trend, a new pattern that you need them to be up to speed with. You need to use the data that you're getting from there to drive your cyber awareness program. Thank you.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Doc and Musa. It's about finding the rhythm in your organization. What works for you? So I can tell you in the university, if you try any training around June or December when it's exam period and marking, etc., you're going to get nothing from no one. So it's driven by the data. When are people most responsive? When is a time that they could engage in the training, but not that it's maybe every quarter, twice a year perhaps. But then I think it also needs to be responsive. And I think the question was also speaking to, with new AI trends and how things evolve, that there's little micro nuggets or that micro learning that can happen as well. So there's a big data incident in the public sector. This should be broadcast to everyone and a little bit of training to go out. How can we protect from this happening? Or a global incident happening in an organization, what went wrong, and use those little case studies to raise awareness and to educate staff as well. So a more formalized training at regular intervals. You decide what that regular is within your organization, what people will respond to, and then being reactive, I think, to the environment is quite important as well.
Thank you very much, Prof. I think that that brings us to the last of our questions. If anybody still has a question, maybe they can take the floor, maybe and raise their hand, and we can answer it that way. If not, then maybe we can hand back to the program director again. Any other questions? 1, 2, and closing. All right, I'm handing back to Mr. Bongani. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you very much for the wonderful answers, panel.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mlamli, for facilitating that Q&A. I'm not going to make any further summaries with the risk of distorting the clear messages that were given today. I have learned a lot. And I think that also our audience that have set aside time to attend this webinar have also learned a lot. A special thanks to them, because this webinar would not have been possible without their participation. And also a big thanks to our panelists who also have made time to prepare and also to make time to be in this webinar. That is Musa, Dr. and Prof. Carolyn. Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of this webinar. We look forward to maintaining this learning network in order to improve our security awareness when it comes to cyber issues. Have a lovely Friday and keep well. Thank you and bye-bye.